So if you sit down to plan a big international trip, immediately you're forced into the cold, hard math of it all. You pull up the flight algorithms, you check the exchange rates, factor in lodging, and, well, a calculator just spits out this binary reality.
Right. It either makes financial sense or it just absolutely doesn't.
Exactly. You rely on that spreadsheet logic to tell you what is reasonable and what is absurd. But today on the deep dive, we are looking at a situation where that logic totally falls apart.
Yeah, because we use those spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Because human behavior is, it's inherently messy, right? And we want a quantifiable way to make decisions.
For sure.
But when you step into the territory of extreme generosity, like when people deliberately choose sacrifice, that entire economic equation just shatters. Human motivation in those moments completely defies all baseline economic logic.
It really does. And we're looking at a manuscript today that captures exactly this paradox. It's a message that was delivered by Pastor Yasushi Nomoto.
At the Kahului Union Church, right? On Maui.
Yeah, Kahului Union Church on Maui. And this was dated May 24, 2026. And the text opens with a scenario that just perfectly illustrates this broken spreadsheet idea.
It's a great example.
Right. So a Japanese gospel choir decides to travel all the way from Japan to Maui to host a music workshop. And some of these members had actually visited 2 years prior, right after the really devastating Lahaina wildfire, and they basically just wanted to return.
But I mean, on paper, this is a terrible deal for these choir members. The manuscript lays out the economic reality very clearly. Japan is facing a historically weak yen.
Which changes everything about international travel.
Completely. It means their purchasing power abroad is severely diminished. And on top of that, airline tickets have just skyrocketed due to rising fuel costs. So they are paying a massive premium just to cross the Pacific.
Right. And it's not just the money. The text also points out a sacrifice of time that goes far beyond just taking a few days off work. These women are traveling during Golden Week.
Which is a huge deal.
It is. For anyone unfamiliar with the Japanese corporate structure, Golden Week isn't just, a long weekend. It is often the one guaranteed extended cluster of national holidays that working professionals get all year.
Yeah, it functions as this sort of psychological safety valve for what is an incredibly intense work culture.
Exactly. So they aren't just burning cash on a bad exchange rate. They are sacrificing their singular, precious opportunity to just decompress and rest.
They're willingly walking into a scenario where the cost of living, the travel expenses, and just the physical exhaustion are entirely stacked against them.
So if you are the one calculating profit and loss, crossing the ocean to host a workshop for a grieving community is objectively not the best deal.
No, not at all.
So the fundamental question this manuscript tackles is this. If calculating the costs makes this look like such a terrible idea, what actually drove them to do it?
Well, the pastor explains their motivation by drawing a really stark historical parallel. He points to the early Christian churches of Macedonia.
Okay, let's dive into that context.
Yeah, so specifically the communities in Philippi, Thessalonica, and Berea around AD 55 to 56. The Apostle Paul actually wrote about these churches in his letters, and he described their condition as being in extreme poverty.
And the manuscript notes they were suffering under, heavy Roman taxation, right, and general economic decline. But there's also a really specific social element to this poverty, wasn't there?
Yes, absolutely. Much of their economic ruin was tied directly to their new faith. Because in the first century, the Roman Empire operated on this deeply intertwined system of commerce and the imperial cult.
Right, so religion and business were essentially merged.
Exactly. If you refused to participate in the local religious and societal norms, you were viewed as this subversive troublemaker. These Macedonian Christians were socially ostracized.
Wow.
Which meant they were locked out of the local trade guilds. They literally lost their jobs, their businesses, and their social standing. All at once.
Okay, wait. I need to stop you right there, because from a purely psychological standpoint, this makes absolutely zero sense.
How so?
Well, when humans face severe economic decline, job loss, and persecution, when our actual survival is on the line, our biological imperative kicks in.
Oh, the survival instinct.
Yeah.
Right.
We circle the wagons. We hoard resources to protect ourselves and our immediate families. It's the classic sinking ship scenario. If your boat is going down, you do not start throwing your life jackets to other people in the water.
That's a great point. You secure your own oxygen mask first.
Exactly. So how does this manuscript explain a group of people willingly giving away their resources in the middle of an economic storm? Because that defies the very core of human evolution and the survival instinct.
It does. But the pastor attributes it to a mechanism outlined by the Apostle Paul. He argues that encountering grace organically generates an overflowing joy, and that specific type of joy actually overrides the survival instinct.
Okay, that sounds nice, but to understand how that works, I feel like we have to strip away the religious jargon for a second and look at how grace functions psychologically in this context. Unpack that mechanism for me. How does an abstract theological concept like grace dismantle a hardwired biological imperative like survival?
Well, think about the immense psychological pressure of the survival instinct. It's a crushing weight, right? It dictates that your worth, your safety, and your entire existence depend on what you can hoard, what you can earn, or what you can protect.
Right, it's exhausting. You're constantly guarding your perimeter.
Yes. But grace, in the framework of this text, is the sudden, radical realization that you are loved, valued, and ultimately secure, completely independent of your economic status or your societal standing.
Oh, wow. So it's a total recentering of identity.
Exactly.
If your core security is no longer tied to your bank account or, your social credit score in the Roman Empire, the threat of losing those things suddenly loses its bite.
That's it, exactly. When that immense psychological pressure drops, the resulting release manifests as an indestructible joy. And the text is very careful to clarify here that the Macedonians' poverty wasn't some noble virtue.
Right, like suffering itself isn't the goal here.
No, not at all. The focus is on a joy so profound that it makes the suffering irrelevant. Their generosity toward the suffering church in Jerusalem, it wasn't driven by some grim sense of obligation.
Yeah.
Or guilt.
Yeah.
Or, a desire to buy favor with God.
It was just the natural byproduct of this internal release.
Yes.
See, that's fascinating because we usually view generosity as a duty. Like, it's a moral obligation we have to fulfill even when it hurts, but this manuscript flips that paradigm completely.
It really does. The motivation is pure, unadulterated joy.
And the pastor argues this isn't just an ancient first-century phenomenon, right? He claims this is the exact same energy he witnessed in that visiting gospel choir in 2026.
Yes, because joy has a very specific social function, which the text highlights through the choir's behavior. It organically shifts people from being passive spectators to active participants. It operates essentially as a social contagion.
The social contagion, I like that. The manuscript details how the choir's workshop in Maui wasn't just technically polished. I mean, their performance was excellent, the singing was beautiful, the leadership was sharp.
Right, but technical polish is just execution.
Exactly. Execution doesn't inspire a community to sacrifice. Polish might earn applause, but it doesn't move hearts.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And the pastor notes there was an undeniable atmosphere among the choir members that communicated a single message, that serving the Lord is a joy. You could hear it in the specificity of their prayers.
What were they praying for, specifically?
They were praying for the church to be revitalized, for the Japanese ministry to be blessed, and for the gospel to actually reach the Japanese people in Maui.
What fascinates me here is the psychological difference in their approach, because they didn't come to Maui with a savior complex.
Oh, definitely not.
Right. They didn't show up saying, well, we are the experts from Japan, and we're here to fix your grieving community.
Which is how so many aid missions often feel. But the manuscript quotes Paul describing it as the privilege of sharing in service. They viewed the act of serving not as a top-down mandate, but as an honor they were being invited into. They were basically asking to join in.
That completely changes the dynamic of the room. I mean, think about the feeling of a mandatory corporate charity event.
Oh, right.
Everyone is wearing the matching T-shirts, they're checking their watches, and just waiting for the obligation to be fulfilled so they can go home.
We've all been there.
Yeah. Now, compare that to a grassroots movement where people are happily getting their hands dirty because they genuinely feel privileged just to be allowed to participate.
It's night and day. The corporate charity event is fueled by obligation. And as the manuscript really astutely observes, obligation is a finite fuel source. It always burns out.
Always.
You cannot sustain extreme effort or sacrifice through duty alone.
And the testimonies of the choir members in the text, they reveal a completely different starting point. When they were asked how they got involved in all of this, almost all of them shared the exact same initial motivation.
Which was what?
They said, at first, gospel choir was simply fun.
Fun. Yeah, fun is the gateway. They enjoyed the act of singing. They enjoyed the community of gathering together. And within that initial low-stakes joy, they gradually came to know their faith more deeply.
So when joy is the baseline, people naturally lean in. They think, I want to stay here longer. I want to go deeper.
And that joy draws the observer in too. Think about the congregation in Maui.
Yeah.
They watch these women sacrifice their golden week, spend exorbitant amounts of money, and do it all with massive smiles on their faces.
Right. The natural human response to witnessing that is, I want to be a part of whatever they have.
Exactly. Which, of course, brings us to a massive logistical problem.
The chaos of contagious joy.
Precisely. If joy is this highly contagious grassroots fuel, what happens when you have 50 or 100 people who catch it all at once?
Right. If everyone is suddenly acting on their own joyful impulses and they all want to contribute their own ideas at the exact same time, you don't get a unified movement.
No, you get complete organizational chaos.
So how does a highly motivated, joy-driven community actually channel this energy effectively, like without squashing the very joy that fueled it in the first place?
Well, the manuscript addresses this tension by looking at the order of operations in that ancient Macedonian church. The pastor references 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 5.
Okay, what does it say?
The Macedonians didn't just throw their money at the Jerusalem church and say, here, you figure it out. The text says they exceeded expectations by doing things in a very specific 2-step sequence.
A 2-step sequence?
Yeah. First, they gave themselves to the Lord. And then, secondly, they entrusted themselves to their spiritual leaders according to the will of God.
Okay, I have to challenge this on behalf of the modern listener.
I figured you might.
Well, we live in an era that absolutely idolizes individual passion. We are constantly told to follow our own truth, trust our gut, disrupt the system. The idea of voluntarily submitting to spiritual leaders, or really any organizational authority, sounds incredibly restrictive.
Oh, it sounds terrible to modern ears.
Right. To a modern ear, it sounds like conforming, like checking your brain and your unique identity at the door.
It runs entirely counter to the modern ethos of radical individualism.
Oh.
The concept of submission today is heavily loaded with negative connotations of control and abuse.
It's exactly.
But the manuscript uses a very specific biological metaphor to explain why this order of operations is vital. It describes the church as a body.
The body of Christ.
Right. True community, in this framework, isn't the absence of individual passion. It is the voluntary orchestration of it. Think about how a biological nervous system works.
Okay.
If you have a body, and the arm decides it wants to go left because it feels very passionately about going left, but the leg wants to go right, the body cannot move forward.
It just tears itself apart?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The nervous system exists to synthesize the sensory input and the power of the limbs so the entire organism can move cohesively.
See, this is exactly what happens to so many well-meaning grassroots organizations. Everyone has great intentions, they have immense passion, but because there is no central nervous system coordinating the movement, they just burn out in a flurry of disorganized activity.
Yeah, the text acknowledges that there are naturally many different opinions, feelings, and ideas within any group of people. But true unity requires the individual to first surrender the ego.
Which is the hardest part.
It is. But by offering the self first, by saying, Lord, please help me to do whatever you desire of me, you aren't waiting for someone else to do the heavy lifting. But you also aren't bulldozing ahead with your personal agenda.
You are handing over your individual passion to be orchestrated for the greater good. And I really want to highlight how the text describes the result of this surrender, because it doesn't lead to a mindless, uniform cult where everyone does the exact same thing.
Far from it. The manuscript emphasizes that once the heart is offered, God uses each person according to a highly individualized set of metrics.
Yeah, the text lists them specifically, according to their personality, their circumstances, their finances, and their health.
Personality, circumstances, finances, and health. It acknowledges reality.
Right. It doesn't demand that the person with failing health give the same physical labor as the athlete.
No. And it doesn't demand the person in poverty give the same financial amount as the wealthy person. It is meticulously tailored to what you actually have to offer, but only after you are willing to relinquish control over how it's used.
It is highly individualized in its application, but completely unified in its direction.
Yes, and the spiritual leaders, as the text notes, bear the heavy responsibility of prayerfully seeking that unified direction under the authority of Scripture. But the engine that actually moves the body forward is the congregation saying, we want to join in, we want to be used.
Which brings us back to the spreadsheet, doesn't it? When you look at the macro view of this manuscript, whether you are analyzing it from a deeply theological perspective, like the congregation at the Kahului Union Church, or whether you are just a secular listener observing how highly dedicated communities function, the underlying sociology is identical.
It really is. Lasting impact, true generosity, and the willingness to cross oceans when it makes absolutely zero financial sense, well, it cannot be sustained by a spreadsheet.
No, obligation is a finite resource.
Yeah,
And it inevitably leads to resentment and burnout.
right. It requires an authentic, contagious, joy-driven commitment. A commitment that actually overrides our natural defensive, self-protective instincts.
When that kind of joy enters the room, the spreadsheet becomes entirely irrelevant.
And that actually brings us to the final thought we want to leave you with today. We've established that obligation burns out, right? And that indestructible joy only arises when we are willing to surrender our personal agendas to a larger unified purpose.
It's that psychological release of letting go of your own survival metrics.
Exactly. So the question for you is this. What is the one logical boundary in your life right now? What is that one very reasonable, self-protective instinct you're holding on to tightly that might actually be the very thing keeping you from experiencing this kind of transformative joy?
Wow, yeah.
What is the cold, hard math you're using to justify closing your heart when you might actually be receiving an invitation to simply join in?
Man, that is a profound question to carry with you as you look at your own spreadsheets this week. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.